Hello everyone! Thank you for tuning in to this short talk on the information worlds of parents, specifically parents of young children. My name is Samantha Greenfield, Children's Librarian and LIS Master's Student at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. My research is inspired by my work in the Children's Department of a public library, where I have daily contact with young patrons and their families. As a librarian, I want to ensure that the services and materials we are providing meet the actual needs of our population and not just our perception of those needs. I propose that one of the best ways to know that if you are meeting an information need is to inform oneself about the information world that created the need. Before discussing the information needs and behaviors of this particular population, I would first like to define them. I've included 3 photographs here of parents parenting in the library to give a face to all of this data that I'm going to be sharing shortly. Throughout the presentation, I will be using the term parent, but the research I will be discussing includes both biological parents and other caregivers, such as custodial grandparents. Thus, I will define a parent here as an adult who is directly involved in the daily care and development of a child. I chose to focus on the study of parents of young children, which is to say children from birth to primary school, or about ages 0 to 12. I limited my study to their information needs and behavior in regards to their children and parenting, and while this talk is given through the lens of library and information science, discussion is not limited only to information needs within the library. To fully understand the population, we must understand their needs as a whole. So before moving on, I would like to spend some time discussing why it is important for library professionals to understand the information behaviors of parents of young children. The first reason, and this is the one that speaks the most to me as a librarian who works with children, is for the benefit of young people. We know that the first 6 years of life are critical for the foundation of a person's cognitive, social, and emotional development, as shown here in this graphic from the Center for Disease Control. In these years, children develop an understanding of language, the ability to walk, the ability to express themselves, etc., and parents are obviously a huge part of this process. Helping parents meet their information needs in regards to their children is just another way for us to advocate for our youth. Secondly, parents make up a large part of the population that we serve in libraries. In a 2016 Pew study, 55% of parents surveyed said that they had used a library in the last year versus just 48% of all other adults. They are also more likely than other adults to use our space and services, as evidenced by the chart at the right taken from a 2013 Pew survey. Parents of minor children are represented in the dark navy bar, and other adults are represented in the blue bar, and we can see that the percentages are higher for the parents of minor children in all of the categories. So parents are in our space, they're using our resources, and we need to make sure that we are understanding their needs. But finally, while these stats show that a large number of parents are taking advantage of the library, it's also true that 1 in 6, or 17% of those parents surveyed in 2013 had never been in a library before at all. So this indicates that there is still a gap between the services we are providing and the services needed, and it is on us to figure out how to fill it. A dive into the literature gives us some answers to one of our main questions we are asking tonight. What are the information needs of young parents? Articles are in agreement that general development information is often needed. Issues include children's sleep and eating schedules, academic concerns, as well as topics like breastfeeding and temperament. As the population is divided into smaller subgroups, information needs become more specific. In studies of subgroups of parents, such as those with gender-creative or transgender children, or those with children on the autism spectrum, new information needs emerged that were not discussed in the more general studies, such as the need for information about assisting a child in their transition, or information on various specific developmental delays. So we can see here that there's a wide variety of information needs, and I also think that it's worth noting the fact that parents who possess lower socioeconomic status will often have more complex needs or more barriers in the way of reaching them. So for example, a parent could need information about symptoms of an illness that their child is showing, but in order to seek out the answer from a health professional, they may run into barriers of childcare for other children, an inflexible work schedule, etc. And this infographic shows barriers that most often prevent attendance to passive programming for parents, showing that simply making information available in a space like a library is not always an effective solution to an information need. The literature also provided insight into the ways that parents of young children seek information. As seen here, the most popular source of information is the internet, often via a Google search. And other sources of information access include people like healthcare professionals and people that they know, and more typical resources such as books, pamphlets, and brochures. And I would now like to transition to a discussion of various information behavior concepts and how these concepts can help us make sense of all the data discussed on the previous slides. The first relevant concept is information overload. And as we saw on the previous graphic, parents have an overwhelming amount of information around them at all times, including but not limited to the internet, books, newspapers, social media, family, friends, other parents. And attempting to sift through all of these information sources can lead to feelings of anxiety, frustration, uncertainty, which could thus prevent a parent from finding the information that they need. And another related factor is the trustworthiness of all of this information. So as we know from Chapman's small world theory, people are often distrustful of other sources of information that they view as outside of their small world, and they're more likely to utilize sources that they are already aware of and relate to and trust, such as family or friends. Parents often mentioned using their own parents or other family members as an information source, and this is why. So as librarians working in institutions, we must be aware of what it means to be in a small world and that we will oftentimes be viewed as outsiders to those small worlds. And there's also the underlying issue of the affective domain. Searches for information are not done in a bubble. There's context surrounding all information behavior, and a large part of this context is the emotional state of the person at the time. So feelings like anxiety and uncertainty are common in parents of young children, and if we know this, we can plan accordingly in our interactions with them. So I would like to end the presentation by going into more depth about the professional application of what we have learned about the information behaviors of parents of young children. So for me, as a practicing public librarian, this is what it's all about. So to start, we must take it into our own hands to inform ourselves about the community's needs, both generally and at a local level. So consider surveying parents to find out what kind of resources would be most helpful to them. And while we are conceptualizing and building these services, be mindful of the barriers to information that affect large parts of our community. Examples of combating barriers like lack of transportation or time or childcare could include taking library services out of the library and to those that are affected via bookmobiles or other services like we can see here at the right. And additionally, do not neglect social media or the library website's mobile version. One of the studies I read reported that for many low-income families, the majority of their time online is done through mobile devices, so we need to make sure to serve them as well as those who can access our resources through a computer. And lastly, focus on building trust with the community to combat outsider status within small worlds. Reach out to and partner with trusted organizations and individuals within the community who already have a position of trust in the world, such as churches and other community organizations. And those in positions of power in libraries, keep small worlds theory in mind in your hiring practices. Hiring diverse staff who may have the ability to speak the language of groups within your community can go a long way towards making the library a welcoming place. And indeed, if we all keep in mind the motivating factors behind information behavior, we will be able to serve our patrons effectively, which is certainly helpful in gaining the trust of the community. So thank you everyone for your attention to my presentation today. Again, my name is Samantha Greenfield. If you would like to contact me with any comments or additional insight, I would definitely welcome that. You can do so by sending me an email at srg4@illinois.edu. Thanks again.